Hello, and welcome to another Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy such as the deferred sales trust is the best way, or one of the most amazing ways for you to defer capital gains taxes, eliminate the need for the 1031 exchange, raise more capital, and ultimately have more freedom to make choices with your wealth when exiting highly appreciated assets. Each and every episode, by the way, my name is Brett Swartz, and I'm founder of Capital Gains Tax Solutions. In each and every episode, we are here to try to bring some of the best business, real estate, financial, and leaders in the world to you, and so that we can hang out and learn their best secrets, and so that you can have an amazing opportunity to create passive wealth and also defer your tax and so much more. I'm excited about our next guest. She's out of the great state of Minnesota. And she's a doctor. She's a CEO, and she's the co-founder of Black Swan Real Estate, a leading national presenter and investment thought leader, real estate expert. And she's a psychiatrist, mother of four, and mentor to physicians and real estate investors from all walks of life. And she has so much to share with us. And we're going to be talking about tax advantages of passive real estate investing. Please welcome to the show with me, Dr. Elaine Stageberg.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for our listeners getting to know you for the first time, would you give us a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my name's Dr. Elaine Stageberg. I'm a psychiatrist by training, but I actually just run our real estate portfolio full-time these days. Reached financial freedom many years ago from our real estate portfolio, and that's just continued to scale. I run our company, Black Swan Real Estate, with my husband, Nick. He had a career in tech and also left that career to run our real estate portfolio. As you mentioned, we have four wonderful children, so we're really busy in the business, and then also really busy at home with those kids. The kids are 1, 3, 6, and 8. So lots of that fun chaos at home with them. We live in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic. That's where I did my training and where we've principally built our portfolio. And then also about a third of our portfolio is in Tacoma, Washington.
Fantastic. Elaine, before we dive into tax advantages of passive real estate investing, I want to take one other step back. I believe we've all been given certain gifts in this life, and these gifts have been given us to be a blessing and help to others. So maybe go back to the earlier days before you were the doctor, maybe just studying at that point before the big real estate investments. What would you say the one or two strengths or gifts you believe you were given, and how does that help how you help and bless people today?
That's a really great question. I think some of the gifts that I've been given is I am not afraid to work hard. I'm not afraid to work long hours, right? Like you can see how that naturally lent itself to a career in medicine. I also am very invested in a marathon. Like sprints are not necessarily very interesting to me, or when I do have sprints in my life, I know that that's part of a longer strategy. So even from a young age, I was able to have a very long-term focus of what I wanted in my career, in my marriage, with my children. As a personal example, we knew we wanted 5 children. So that takes like a decade for that to happen. We're 4/5 of the way through, and crossing our fingers, we get that 5th one. But being able to say, at earlier points in my life, the things that I want are X, Y, and Z, and they will take a long time to get there. And that's okay. And making forward progress on that every single day. I love the idea that we overestimate what we can do in a day, a week, or a month, but we often underestimate what we can do in a decade. And I think that very much applies to my life and to other people's lives as well.
Amazing. So it sounds like perhaps strategic planning with long-term, consistent planning and vision. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Awesome. Right on. Great. Well, let's dive right into the topic at hand with that in mind, which is tax advantages of passive real estate investing. So Elaine, what is the number one secret to for investors to have tax advantage investments through passive real estate?
So the thing that's really worked for us in our portfolio is we've never sold anything. So we're able to take all of those losses that come from depreciation and expenses, and then instead of doing a sale and getting into the maneuvers that are needed to defer those capital gains after that sale, we've made the decision very early on in our portfolio that we would just never sell anything, and that we would always acquire things, renovate things, and then manage things and take care of those things along the way. We call them our golden geese. But of course, then the question that you might be thinking to yourself is, well, what about your equity? How do you unlock your equity? We've used a cash out refi strategy. So that's been our plan all the way back from our very first investments. I'm sure, we might talk a little bit about how that's changed or what we've done tactically to do our cash out refis over the last, 12 to 18 months as interest rates have gone up. But for us, it was just always about how do we take one bucket of money, use that to acquire a property, improve that property, get our cash out of that property, keep that cash flowing property, and be able to benefit from the cash flow, the debt pay down, and the market appreciation of that property, but then buy the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And in doing so, just continue to carry forward all of those losses and not have to worry about any capital gains.
Absolutely amazing. We're talking with Elaine Stageberg and Dr. Elaine Stageberg. BlackSwanTeam.com is the website if you want to learn more. BlackSwanTeam.com. Okay, so let me see if I gather that correctly. So buy and never sell, buy and add value, buy, never sell, add value, and cash out refi to unlock the equity and go buy more. Is that a fair summary so far, Elaine?
Absolutely.
Excellent. And, and I always thought too, as long as you don't over leverage or get into what's called bad debt, the debt can make the deal go wrong, right? Pretty quickly. And you only 50% leverage. I mean, it's kind of a thought too. I mean, can you really lose in multifamily value add real estate? I mean, to me, it's probably the safest, most durable, consistent, returns, especially if you can scale and you're buying larger deals and hire that full-time property manager. But to me, it's like collecting Boardwalk, Park Place, and all the other places around the board. Any thoughts on that, or am I catching it pretty good?
Yeah, I think you sum it up, very well there. So we did scale along the way. So we have a large portfolio of single family homes. We did all of those with our own capital. And then along the way, we got to a place where I think it was about 15 single family homes that we were ready to do a bulk cash out refi. We then took that capital and bought a townhome community that also came with some land. That townhome community is now 115 townhomes. We came with 30, we built an additional 85, and then we've scaled into large multifamily. And along the way, people started coming to us and asking if they could passively invest alongside us. And so we grew our business very organically. And when we made that transition into joint ventures and then eventually into our private equity funds, we had to ask ourselves, do we want to do kind of the typical private equity model where there's a pref and a waterfall and, distributions, and then there's usually a sale at year, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7. And that just didn't feel super congruent to us because we had built our own personal wealth through using the Burr method and through keeping all of those properties. So we just carried that same business plan into large multifamily. So all the way from our first single family home that was $35,000 to our most recent acquisition. It was a 129 unit multifamily building here in Rochester, Minnesota, the largest residential real estate transaction in the state of Minnesota so far this year. It's always been that same investment methodology of buying it, fixing it up, doing a cash out refi, keeping it, and then continuing to do cash out refis in the future as well, so that we're always able to maximize our total return on equity, but then keep all of those tax advantages because there's no sale and no depreciation recapture.
Absolutely. Because we like to say it's all about tax flow, not just cash flow. And if you're not having a tax flow plan, you're going to get hammered. And Minnesota is one of the worst states too, along with California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, for taxes, right? And so that's a big thing to consider. Okay, so private equity funds, let's dive into that a little bit more. So people come in and they're like, hey, I want to invest with you. You're like, sweet. We got this deal. We're going to be building these townhomes. We bought them and going to build another 85 and or a different deal maybe you did that with. But the point is they're bringing in some capital. I imagine they're accredited investors, right? And then they probably say, I don't necessarily need or want any liquidity, at least not for the next 3 to 5 years, perhaps, I don't know. And or what's kind of the expectations that you're setting because you're not necessarily going to be selling. You will do a cash out refi. If they cash out refi, do they get their money back and they remain the owner in the deal and continue to roll forward? And then you just do that again. Walk me through kind of that whole thought process there.
Yeah, you got a lot of the major principles there. So, folks invest in the private equity fund. We then go out and buy residential real estate, both portfolios of single family homes and then also large multifamily. We do our value add plan. The number one metric that we target is payback period. So that's how long it takes for us to get all of someone's originally invested capital back to them. We tell people to plan for 5 years for that. Historically, it's never taken more than 3 years, but we're just big believers in under promising and over delivering, particularly with the tides that are in real estate or the headwinds that are in real estate right now. And then after that, our investors stay in the deal indefinitely with us all the way until that final sale. So unlike other deal structures where investors are often taken out of the deal at the time of a cash out refi, we keep our investors in at their original ownership percentage, and then they share in the cash flow and then the future cash out refis that we're able to do on all of those assets all the way through till the very end. Inside of our private equity funds, we're targeting a 20 to 25 year hold. For our own real estate holdings, we're thinking more of, generational wealth and being able to pass that on to our heirs so that they can get that step up in basis. That's a little harder to do inside of a private equity structure. So we're planning to hold for about 20 to 25 years, sell everything, and then share out the final equity. And then the funds would be officially closed at that point.
Okay, excellent. And then talk about a little bit like the pref returns and or the how if someone comes with $1 million and the capital raise is 5 million, so they come with about 20% of the capital. What percentage of ownership are they receiving? Do they have a preferred return? What's kind of the split? How does that work?
So one of the things that's different about our fund is we have no asset management level fees whatsoever. So we don't take an acquisition fee, a capital event fee, a loan recourse fee, all of the fees that are at the GP level. We choose not to take those fees. We have a philosophical belief that disaligns interests between GPs and LPs. So we don't take those. All of the capital that comes into our fund is used for the acquisition and renovation of those properties. 100% of all of the profits go back to our partners until they're completely repaid. You can kind of think of that as like a 100 pref. It's not really a 100 pref, but essentially just know that all of the profits go back to our partners until they're completely repaid. And then at that point, when we're in that indefinite hold, infinite rate of return period, it's a 50-50 split during that time. And their equity doesn't change or anything, despite the fact that they have all of their capital back. In your example, we're saying it's a $5 million raise. 50% of the equity would go to the capital partner. So if one person brought, say, that whole 5 million, they would have 50% of that deal for the entire time. If 5 people brought $1 million each, they would each have 10% of that deal for the entire duration of the deal.
Excellent. It sounds very, very generous. And so it sounds like 100% capital used for going to the property, all capital used for buying and renovating the property. And then all of the cash flow is going back to paying back the partners.
Exactly.
It doesn't take any asset management fees and no GP fees and no cash out refi fees. And then you look up and it's 3 years now. And like I put the $1 million in and the $1 million of cash flow flowed back. I still maintain my ownership. I got my $1 million back in cash flow, right? I got my K1 and I'm staying in the deal, the same ownership that I had before. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly right. And then one of the things we do for folks who come in at 7 figures or higher is we do give them all of the depreciation that's our share. So just like our split is 50-50, we split the depreciation 50-50. But for folks who come in at $1 million or higher, we give them our proportional share of the depreciation. We find that, folks that are coming in at a higher amount often have a more sophisticated tax problem that they're trying to solve. And so that's one of the ways that we incentivize folks to come in at a higher amount in our funds.
Oh, excellent. But also very generous. And make sure you understand that as you're looking at investments, right? Because that's so important, the taxable depreciation. So you're doing some cost seg, I imagine. You're accelerating the depreciation and doing the bonus.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And so, great. I mean, that all sounds really good. Let's talk about like average returns. How are you doing so far? And then let's also talk about the interest rates and rate caps and how you're faring there with any cash out refis that you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, excellent question. That's been the question of the year for this year. So one of the things that's really important to know is that 100% of the debt across our entire portfolio, our portfolio is about 300 million, about 200 million here in Rochester, about 100 million in Tacoma. All of it is with local regional banks. All of our debt is fixed rate debt. All of it is at least 5-year terms, and much of it right from the closing table, we negotiated a 10-year term with a 5-year reprice, and we try as hard as we can to negotiate that 5-year reprice would be a maximum of a 2% escalation of the interest rate. So we feel really good. And, so we've seen a lot of our colleagues, really feel the heat of interest rate increases over the last year. We've not felt that as much because we have fixed rate debt on the entire portfolio. It's all with local regional banks of folks that we have, personal relationships with. We have lunch with them. We know their kids, those sorts of things. Really knowing that real estate is about both the deal and the debt. And the focus in our entire industry was really on the deal for the last, 5 to 7 years, because debt was just so gosh darn easy to get. And it was basically free. It was, 2 or 3%, but it's really the two together And we just had this, just this intuitive understanding that these really low historic interest rates were not going to stay around forever. And so we locked in as much fixed rate debt as we possibly could. We refied everything we possibly could during those years when rates were as low as possible to put ourselves in as conservative of a position as possible today. One way that interest rates have slowed us down is acquisitions. So we had 4 major acquisitions in the earlier part of this year, and then we've just not been able to, have a meeting of the minds with sellers since then, because they still think, in their minds that rates are 3 or 3.5%. We're like, I wish we could pay what you want for that asset, but with the debt costs, that's just not feasible. So that is one way that it has slowed us down. In terms of getting the cash out refis in 2023, for say the assets we acquired in 2020 or 2021, where they're on that time frame that we're planning to do the cash out refi, what we've been able to do is, of course, we don't want to give up that original mortgage that we have on those properties. Let's say it's at 3.5%. There's no way we want to give that up for, a 7% mortgage. So we've worked with our bankers to put a second mortgage on that property, and they've been happy to do that because they see the renovations, they see, the receipts of all of the costs that we've put into that building. And maybe that second mortgage is at, 5.5 or 6%, but our blended interest rate is still quite low. And again, that second piece of debt is also a fixed rate piece of debt. And the banks have been happy to do that because, typically a second lien is a much weaker position, but it's with the same bank. We've not, had ABC Bank as the first lien holder and then XYZ as the second lien holder. It's the same bank that holds both of those liens. So they're happy to do that. And that allows us to accomplish that cash out refi. So that's an example of how, in 2016, 2017, we were just doing straight normal cash out refis. And then we had to change our tactics so that we could continue to exercise our overall strategy, which is to get real estate, to renovate it, get the cash out, and then continue to hold it. We didn't want to get to a place where we would have to sell in order to unlock our equity. So we had to change the tactics a little bit. And that's how we've been able to do that over the last year.
Amazing. Elaine Stageberg, Dr. Elaine Stageberg. And so you can go to blackswanteam.com. It's blackswanteam.com to learn more about all of the investment opportunities with them, her and her husband and her team. So Elaine, a question on the interest rate. So what would you say is your average blended interest rate? Do you feel like you gave up, you paid, I don't know if regional banks were higher or lower when you're doing those refis and you're fixing that, or what, I love that you have the hands-on with the banks locally. It makes total sense to me, right? So what is the average blended fixed interest rate that you have?
I don't know that number exactly. I know that the highest interest rate piece of debt we have in the portfolio is one of the acquisitions we had in April, and that is at 6.25%. The next highest piece of debt we have in the entire portfolio is at 5.15%. We have several pieces that are at 5.15% because we got them all at kind of the same time. And then everything else is below that. And then another piece of the puzzle is as we were doing our acquisitions in 2021, in 2022, even though interest rates were quite low at that time, I'm sure you remember prices were quite high and sellers wanted, everything and your firstborn and the son in order to be able to buy their properties. So one of the things that we did during that time, speculating that interest rates might go up in the future, is we negotiated 0% no payment ballooned seller carries on many of our assets as a portion of our down payment. So, but when you factor in that 0% as well, just taking a guess, again, this isn't data driven. I don't have a spreadsheet. I've kind of described, some of our debt is at 0%. The highest piece debt is at 6.25%. I would say the extreme majority of it is somewhere between 3.5 and 5. I would guess that the blended interest rate across the entire portfolio is probably 4.25, maybe 4.5.
It's great. And then how about your cash on cash and your cap rates? Like, how are those correlating? How are you doing on those?
So we don't quote a cash on cash because we get to an infinite rate of return, right? So when you're dividing by 0, that's an infinite rate of return. But to answer that question, after we get to that infinite rate of return, we target trying to have about a 10% adjusted cash flow after that. So if someone had $100,000 that was originally invested in the project, they get to that total return of capital, they have $0 left in the deal. And any given normal year after that, our target is to return $10,000 for every $100,000 that had been originally invested. And then when we do subsequent cash out refis, to return a lot more, hopefully around $30,000 during those subsequent cash out refi years. And then of course, there's a little bit of a roller coaster there because cash cash flow goes up as rents go up. And then when there's that cash out refi, then there's that higher debt cost. So then cash flow would go down in the subsequent years. That process will repeat itself about 4 to 5 times in that 20 to 25 year period. Then we'll sell everything and liquidate out the final equity.
Excellent. We're speaking again with Dr. Elaine Stageberg. You can go to blackswanteam.com. It's blackswanteam.com. So Elaine, you mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting, right? So you did a 0% carry you've negotiated, which is amazing for you as the buyer, but I imagine the seller might want something for that. I mean, I don't know, maybe they want a little bit higher price, or, you paid a little bit more for that, which in hindsight, looking at where things have gone, you perhaps made a great deal. But did you feel like you're a little more aggressive on price when you did that? Or what was, maybe you can tell me about that deal. What was the average rent? What was the average, rent bump after renovation? What was the sales price? What was the price per unit, price per square foot? Tell me about that. Was it an A, B, or C deal?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a trade for that, right? For a seller to agree to 0% and no payments for, we do a 5-year balloon on those. And at that time, that was when sellers were just, gunning for that top line number to be as high as possible. And so we were able to say, we can give you this top line with these other, restrictions in the deal. That's what makes it work for us. And on the whole, I'm glad we did that, because we were able to acquire a lot of real estate in those years at very favorable interest rates, be able to exercise our value add plan. And several of those deals were in such disrepair, and that maybe they were owned by folks that had owned them for 20 or even 30 years. They weren't using sophisticated property management software. They didn't have good books. So we weren't able even to get the full amount that we would want to get from a regional bank. We target an 80% LTV for our debt, and we weren't able to get that because they didn't have appropriate financials and those sorts of things. So we would say, we can get you your top line, but you need to bring this amount at 0% with no payments until there's this balloon. And we knew that, we don't care about their existing financials. We don't care about how they've been operating the asset, because we knew we were going to do these very deep value add plans. So I find that works when there's a seller who has a very distressed asset with poor financials, poor record keeping. They're just not able to get the things together that you need to get traditional bank financing, or at least to get enough LTV that you want. And so those are the types of deals that we put together. An example, a concrete example, is we acquired the former City Hall of Rochester. It's called Residences of Old City Hall. Really lovely building, built in the 1920s. It served as the City Hall for about 70 years. And then it was very nicely converted in an adaptive reuse project to a very nice apartment building in the early 2000s. And that owner still owned it. And he was a very sophisticated engineer and did a really wonderful job with that adaptive reuse, but really wasn't a great property manager, really wasn't a great asset manager. And so he had very poor record keeping and other things. We paid $5 million. He carried $1 million of that as a 0% interest rate, no payments, 5-year balloon. We did a $500,000 down payment with the bank that actually served as our construction escrow. So as we renovated the units, we were able to refund ourselves out of that. So in some ways, you can say we had no down payment at all on that asset. And that appraised for $8 million at the time that we closed on it. The land alone is probably worth about $6 million. And when we're all done with our renovation, we anticipate it might be worth maybe $9 or $10 million. So that's an example of, kind of understanding the psychology of the seller, understanding the type of deal that you're looking for, how you can meet someone else's needs and use something to kind of shore up some of the weaknesses that they have so that you can get a deal together. And then the numbers of how we made that work.
It's fantastic, Elaine. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just curious, what was the cash flow on that? Is it cash flowing when you bought it, or is it something that's like more of a value add? You got to take some time to get some money into it.
A value add. Yeah.
Okay.
So when we first acquired it, because, there was essentially, you can kind of think of it as like very little debt on it. It was essentially cash flow neutral, but then, we immediately started vacating those units and then putting cash into it from that construction escrow. So there was a period there for, probably about 12 months where we're working through that renovation project. And now people are placed in those units, in those renovated units at new higher rents, and it's cash flowing very nicely. And then because it's such an interesting asset, and we live in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic, which is really a tourist town. It's a medical tourism downtown. We've converted several of those units to short-term furnished rentals on platforms like VRBO or Airbnb or Furnished Finders. And so we're able to increase the cash flow even more. People aren't coming here for vacation, but they still want to have a nice time when they're here to get their medical care. And it's really neat to get to spend a few nights in the former City Hall of Rochester. So that's an example of, things that we've done this year. In the time that we, typically would be spending on acquisitions at this phase of the year, there aren't really many acquisitions out there for us. So we're thinking about, okay, well, how can we use that time to maximize the profit of the existing portfolio we already have? So that's one of the things we've done here. I know you didn't ask that, but it's top of mind.
I love it. This is great. You're giving us a ton of content, Elaine. So I want to shift a little bit to capital gains tax. I know you're never going to sell, which is great, until 25 years. But I imagine you might have either investors or people that want to bring capital to you guys, but they have a huge capital gains tax, perhaps even bigger than what the cost seg could do for them if they come into the deal, right? And so, for example, we just had a $13 million car wash exit, and they're developers. Cool. And so it's mostly a business sale. It was also real estate. And we did another $7 million business in Colorado, a deal there. And so we help people defer the tax, not using a 1031, but then go into passive real estate investments. And the cool thing about it too is we can help them reset a depreciation schedule the way that we structure the deal after they carry a note, that's why as part I was asking about the 0%. Instead of carrying for you, which is great, you got a good deal. Maybe you paid a little bit more, a little bit less. Maybe you could have got a little bit less. But what we structure is on the sale, the seller sells it to a trust and the trust sells it to you, and they carry paper for the trust. And they get to earn somewhere between 6, 7, 8, and 9%, all tax deferred. But even more than that, they can put it into liquid investments, and they can put it into illiquid investments, and they can have they have no timing restrictions, right? And so part of that, back to that car wash exit, they did not want a 1031 because A, they're developers, but even B, they go, this market's crazy. Like, we were sold it for 10 and we sold it for 13. And so we like to teach is buying, selling high and buying low, right? Not selling high and doing a shotgun wedding in 180 days and overpaying for a property and with bad debt. Which is part of what we're seeing right now. Because the challenge is the seller who says, hey, I want to sell at a 3.5 cap, because he's looking at two options. One, paying massive tax, which is likely for a lot of people who've owned for a long time, or especially if you're buying value add and mom and pops, right? Or B, selling and doing a 1031 and having to get a higher interest rate with valuations. And so they basically it's a standstill. They go, who's going to call our bluff? They're like, I'm either going to hold forever or I'm going to pay massive tax. And this is where we come in and we think it's a great solution. So I'm curious what you think about this. We say, hey, have your cake and eat it too. Sell at a high price, pay off all your debt. You don't have to go back into more debt and more property and more toilets and trash and liability. In fact, we had Warren and Catherine, a client of ours. I helped them sell a $2.5 million building in Sacramento. I'm also a real estate broker, started at Marcus & Millichap, do multifamily investments. And we helped them exit, and they had a $120,000 NOI. And instead, now they have like $190,000 in cash flow. They got to defer their tax. They got to diversify. They went into multiple passive real estate deals in places that are not like Taxifornia. A lot of them are highly overpriced, and going into places that are value add, 400 units as a passive investor, 200 units in Texas, 400 units in New Jersey, actually near Princeton, which I wasn't sure if I was going to go there. So anyways, I'm saying all of that because most people don't know what we do or how we do it. But have you heard of a deferred sales trust before? And is any of this resonating with you?
I have, and everything that you're saying is resonating with me. I think you agree, kind of, based on what I've heard you say there. I think that a 1031 exchange is like the most overhyped thing in real estate. I have kind of solved that by not selling. You have solved that by having this other structure. But you hit so many nails on the head there of 1031s. We also have a real estate brokerage, and I can't tell you how many calls we get of, I just have to buy anything. Like at this point, I don't even care what the price is. I've just run out of time. I need to do something because of the timelines in 1031s. And so, I think they're a useful tool in the tax code. I think everyone should know the tax code very well and think about ways that you can leverage it to your best advantage. But I personally think a 1031 is very overhyped. I think it's been a major distraction for a lot of people. I think it, sounds really good and seems really glitzy and like it's going to solve a lot of problems, but it creates other problems, largely because of the time constraints on it. Now there's just not a lot of deal flow because interest rates are high. And a year or two ago, there was more deal flow, but there were so many people competing for it that people had to make some tough decisions to meet the timelines of their 1031. So I love that, we've both kind of solved a tax problem in a different way that's not a 1031.
Absolutely. And I would love to have like a webinar and really geek out with you about this. Like, this would be really fun. And
we might be like the only two people in the industry that don't like 1031s.
Yeah, well, it is a battle, right? Because there's 5,000 QI companies that are out there just banging the drum of like only 1031, only 1031. And I just went through the '08 crisis. And by the way, I love 1031s when the deal makes sense, when you wanted to buy it anyways. And you found, all the stars aligned. Like, man, it's incredible. It keeps a stepped up basis. It keeps you growing your wealth, right? And that's a win. That's great. But when the '08 hit, before that, people were overpaying in '04, '05, '06, and then basically the music stops in like '07. And then people lost everything. I mean, friends and family and clients lost everything. And I'm going, this doesn't make any sense. And it's because they were over leveraged. They had too much debt, not enough liquidity, and they ran out of time, and they had to just, fire sale or just get foreclosed on. And this is mostly in California, boom bust state for real estate in some ways, in Sacramento. So it's kind of unique, but it left a part of me to say there's got to be a better way. And if there is a better way, guess what? I want to share that with people. And that's why we came out with our book, Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan. And we share the entire story of how this works. But it works for cryptocurrency, works for business sales, which are not 1031 eligible, and it can help unlock and attract capital. We did a $5 million Bitcoin exit before the crash. And it helps them to diversify out of crypto, defer all that tax, and go into real estate, go into businesses. It works for public and private stock. But here's the other one I have for you, Elaine, to think about. It solves estate tax. So the big elephant in the room is we've been taught that, hey, swap into your drop, get a stepped up basis, pass it to the kids. We're good. You're good for capital gains tax, but you're not good for estate tax. And in fact, state tax exemptions are dropping in 2026 to about 10 million married, 5 million single. And so we just did a $5 million multifamily exit for a client out of California. There were 25 million, and all of it was basically real estate. And so they had held forever, and they met us. And the reason they sold, and this is the key, they wanted to start to eliminate the estate tax without having to give it all the way to charity, buy a bunch of life insurance, okay, or have like 50 kids to try to gift it away. You run out of time, you run out of kids. And so our solution is called a DST 2.0. And you can eliminate the estate tax on one sale. And so fast forward in 25 years, when you guys have $1 billion under management, and you're like, Brett, oh my gosh, you could call me. What I'm saying is, in one day, in one sale, we eliminate that estate tax. And what that does is it creates that impact generational wealth for the kids to make a difference with the impact versus giving 40%. If you've seen Yellowstone, that's the entire concept of the movie or the show. Kevin Costner and Beth is his daughter. And Beth's like, Dad, you got to sell. And he's like, I don't want to sell. And like, well, they're going to take it all because you're going to die and the death tax is going to kick in. That's the entire premise of the show. And so we're trying to get the word out of how to solve the estate tax. Anyways, I can go on for a long time about that, but that could be a way for you to unlock the deals, is what I'm really getting at, right? The bigger deals that you want to buy, and anyone who's listening to this, are from those that are mom and pop, that have lower rents, that have been generous to the tenants, that have made a ton of wealth, but they don't want a 1031, right? And they want to diversify, and they want some liquidity, and they want to be out of debt, and they want to eliminate their estate tax, or they don't even know that they have that estate tax problem, to the extent that I talked to people like a $40 million exit in Arizona 2 weeks ago, and they didn't even realize what the estate tax was. They thought, oh, I just get the stepped up basis. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, let me help you guys, right? So anyways, if people want to learn more about that, you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. I'll pass it back to you, Elaine. That's enough of my commercial here. Any thoughts on that?
I love it. It's not necessarily about what you make, it's about what you keep. And so at all times thinking about the biggest expense that we have in real estate, that most of us have in our personal lives, like we think it might be, our mortgage or our cost of living or whatever. It's almost always our taxes, whether it's our personal income taxes or taxes in our investments, and thinking about any ways that we can eliminate tax. Nick and I made it our mission about 10 years ago that we would just stop paying federal income tax legally. And so that's been our thought every year, is what do we need to do so that we don't have any federal income tax this year? How can we carry forward losses and do all of these things? And so I love that you're thinking about those things, because, what's the point of creating all of this and then 50, 60, 70 years from now, a bunch of it goes to taxes and doesn't actually, solve the problem of generational wealth that many of us are trying to solve.
And let me leave one last thought with you guys, right? With you, Elaine, and all our listeners. There's $84 trillion, okay, that's passing from one generation to the next in the next 20 years. This is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. There's 77 million baby boomers in the US alone, and every single day, 10,000 are turning 65. And the majority of their wealth is tied to commercial real estate, private equity, which is businesses, and high-end primary homes. And that, in fact, those three asset classes represent 50% of the total net worth in America. And it's happening right now. There's never been a time in history that we know of. Now, here's the question. Will that money be in the hands of the government or the hands of the people? Okay. And if it's in the hands of the government, I can tell you, if you're from Minnesota, I'm from California, it's probably not going to be spent very efficiently or wisely or in a lot of good. Okay. And
that's another topic, but I totally agree. You're on a crusade and it's a worthy one.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. We call it the reverse Tea Party, right? After 247 years in this great country, we've amassed maybe the biggest wealth ever in the history of the world. Right. And now the next 20 years is so vital that you've got to have teams, people you can trust to invest the wealth in multifamily, into other investments, tax teams to help you exit well, to plan all of this. Because if you don't, guess what? It's probably going to be wasted away pretty quickly. And so we're at a window here where we call the reverse Tea Party, that if we have enough people who understand how to execute these business plans, and before you die, you need to set these up before you die, and before you sell your assets, you can eliminate the estate tax, you can defer the capital gains tax, you can invest on your own terms, your own timing. That's enough there. I'm talking next week at the DLP conference. It's a Family Wealth Legacy event. If anyone wants to attend, you should check that out. It's in Palm Beach, Florida. It's going to be amazing. I'll be talking about all of this. So that's kind of a practice round too, Elaine, because that's what I'll be saying on stage.
Love it. If you haven't been there before, you're going to love that location. I did a maternity photo shoot there with my third son. It's a really beautiful beach.
Amazing. Well, we're totally out of time. We're way over time, Elaine. So for our listeners who want to get in touch with you, and we'd love to have you back on the show another time, what is the best place for them to find you?
So our website is meetblackswan.com. That tells you about us, about the history of the company, our portfolio. There's also links there to sign up for our newsletter. We have a monthly live coaching call that we call it Community Power Hour. We do a quarterly live update of our fund performance. We have our calendars are on there. So if you want to block a time to speak with me directly, you can do that all on our website. It's all there at meetblackswan.com.
Amazing. Elaine, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to encourage you to keep using your gifts and talents of blessing people with investing for the long term, holding on forever, refinancing when it makes sense, and building long-term wealth. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our listeners for listening to an episode of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral and estate elimination options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy such as the deferred sales trust, the DST 2.0, is an amazing way for you to create and preserve more wealth and make an impact for generations to come. We're also streaming expert CRE secrets for all our commercial real estate lovers out there. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and please check out the book. We just hit #1 bestseller on Amazon. Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank is in the book, which is pretty cool. I've got a couple chapters as well, and we've got some other amazing multifamily investors, financial planners, all in the book. The CPA for Tony Robbins, he's amazing. Tyler McBroom, check it out. It's called Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan on Amazon. And otherwise, if you want to start building a plan, you can connect with me or my team members by going to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. Thanks everyone for listening. And we